Hey Jacob, thanks for joining us today for the Storyteller series for DO.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Wanted to start with learning more about you and how you started your journey with Mutagen and what got you into the startup.
Yeah, so I come from a physics background. I studied physics as an undergraduate and then in graduate school. And I always kind of had a passion for doing development work. I think as most people do, I started as a teenager making my own personal website or maybe making some websites for other people. So I was always kind of doing development work on the side, but like my true passion was physics. And in both of these things, I always had scenarios where I had to work in remote environments. Whether that was some sort of analysis server or whether that was editing WordPress plugins or something like that. And you had sort of two options. You could either set up your entire production stack locally or try to approximate it locally, or you could work over Vim over SSH, or you could try to use some sort of SFTP client to edit files locally and then push those up one edit at a time to the cloud.
I can imagine that's how painful that is, right? In a way, trying to set up all the stuff locally and try and work through that and then replicate those stuff with your coworkers and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, it was kind of feasible, 10 years ago when you had a little bit simpler stack, but now you've got, the cloud has kind of brought application architectures into this mode where everything is, modularized or componentized. And, you have a bunch of different components and it's really hard to emulate that entire stack locally. Especially with certain technologies, it's you have to have different isolated versions of Python running, for example, for different services. So I had always kind of built like little scripts or tools to make this work, and I was never quite happy with them. There were a few tools that kind of came and went that were open source tools, but they either weren't exactly what I wanted or they kind of the support died off for them.
I see.
So once I got out of grad school, I decided this is kind of a big enough problem that people have, to work in remote environments, or there's this kind of schism between how your application is deployed and how it's developed, right? As all the applications have moved to the cloud, you've moved onto the cloud platforms and you've moved them remotely, but your development's kind of still stuck on your laptop. So there's this kind of like bifurcation between how these things are done, and I think it's an increasing tension that you have, and then it's really. I don't know that there's a good answer to it right now. I think Mutagen is part of that answer. And I think tools like Kubernetes are part of that answer as well, where you can kind of realign the way that you do development and the way that you do deployment and remove that tension between, the two different teams of your, or maybe there's some overlap between those teams, but
yeah, that is so cool. Like, if you think about how the technology's evolved, and every other cloud providers are trying to do their own thing, right? And then force you in a way to say, here's how we do it local development, right? Why don't you install this tool? It's so easy to write this plugin and go there out and whatnot. And as you start expanding your companies, expanding your teams, this problem gets harder and bigger, right? And there's a need to solve that at a fundamental level, and I believe that's where you guys are going with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing is, like, once you get to a certain scale, once you're Google, for example, you can build these tools internally that let everyone work on centralized, reproducible development infrastructure. But if you're a startup, maybe you're between like 3 and 30 people on your development team, you don't really have the time to build all that infrastructure and scaffolding out, right? Because you're trying to iterate on your product as fast as you can. So if you have sort of a turnkey solution that lets you bring on new developers and all they have to do is, spin up, a box on DigitalOcean, like, some CoreOS box, and then they can spin up containers for their development environment and work in that, but still have access to that from their local system. I think it removes a lot of that impedance.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more about like how does the workflow work? Like a new person coming into Mutagen and trying to set this environment up, or for their team, like what's the process look like?
So the idea is that you would script up your application in the same way that you might to run it on Docker for Mac, for example, where you're running locally. So you would set up like a Docker compose file, or if you're using Kubernetes, you can set up a kubeconfig. And then you would start up your infrastructure. What Mutagen allows you to do, though, is instead of relying on volume mounts to mount code or to forward network traffic into your container, you can do that over the internet, essentially. So you can start up your containers on DigitalOcean, and then you can have, or any cloud provider, but I am partial to DigitalOcean.
Good choice, yes.
It's very simple.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so you can start up your containers there, and then you can map code that you want to synchronize in real time into those containers. So it essentially replaces volume mounts, but allows them to work remotely over a network and allows them to work with network dropouts, or if you shut your laptop to go from a meeting to your desk.
That's so
like
cool. That is really cool.
So the idea is, there's a lot of tools out there that allow you to do remote development, but a lot of them force you to give up the tools that you use. You have to use some sort of browser-based editor. And I definitely think those tools have their place. There are definitely paradigms where a browser is a great environment for doing something. But there's a lot of people who have spent 10 or 15 or 20 years configuring Sublime Text or Vim or TextMe or whatever they're using exactly how they want it, right? So to have to switch to some other plugin or some other editor or some web-based thing can be kind of
tricky.
It can be tricky, and it can just be kind of a blocker for a lot of teams. You might have one person on the team who's very enthusiastic and bullish on this idea, but they're the only ones who's kind of willing to switch their tool set over, or maybe it's the tool set they're already using, but it's hard to convince everyone else on your team to get on board with that.
I'm one of them. I absolutely love using Vim, right? It'll be killer for me to go try and change something else and learn new things that takes me out of my comfort zone. So I think that's a fantastic problem that you guys are solving, right? What's the opportunity look like? What do you think where the market is for the product that you're building?
I think that people are going to realize there's a huge potential in moving to cloud-based development environments. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are doing it right now, but a lot of them are kind of building on top of Kubernetes and trying to wrap that up in a way that you have to kind of architect your application in a certain way to use their tool, and maybe you have some plugin or some editor plugin you have to use. And I kind of want to get away from that. I kind of want to get back to this Unix philosophy of individual tool sets that you can combine together. And I think people are going to realize that they can have their cake and eat it too, right? They can have the low-level access to these tools that they want without having to architect their application in a certain way. And I think once they get their application into the cloud for development purposes, they're going to realize, okay, we don't have to mock up S3 anymore. We don't have to mock out our database with SQLite and see how that works. We can use a staging database or a testing database that is the exact same infrastructure that we're working with. And then you don't have situations where you have developers coming in and saying, okay, well, I'm spending the first 3 weeks just getting my development environment set up because the scripts, maybe somebody's hard-coded their home path into the build script or something like that. That just won't happen essentially, right? Because everything will just be relative to the containers or whatever the infrastructure is that you're working in. Not all of it's going to be containers, but it's going to be much simpler to just jump into a project, say, Mutagen project start, and it will overlay the sync and the network mapping onto your containers running in the cloud, and it looks the same. The workflow is the same in terms of how you work with your tools locally. It just doesn't melt your CPU on your laptop trying to run 800 containers.
There you go.
So I think there's a bunch of benefits. I think the missing piece has just been a way to move code. And to some extent network traffic, there are ways to forward network traffic, but to move code in a way that's really low latency and that's not based on virtual file systems or editor plugins or something like that, where it's just actual files in your file system and you've optimized the synchronization to be sub 100 milliseconds, so it looks like it's native file editing because it is, and then it's propagated instantaneously to your remote environments.
That is so awesome. One of the biggest things that came to my mind was the productivity boost that you get by removing all these unknowns, right? By having an environment that is just exactly what it's going to look like in a production, right? Working through that, it's just such an amazing peace of mind as a dev, right? Because you know what you're coding against, you know what the output's going to be like, and things are not going to look different when you actually deploy it, right? So that's fantastic in a way. So
yeah, I think there's also going to be a lot of optimization in terms of moving from the environment you're developing into deployment, and there are companies working on that. But I think the problem is you're trying to work against a local Docker or Kubernetes cluster, and it's really it's still not exactly faithful to what you're going to have when you actually deploy this thing. So I think the first step is to get developers and teams working in cloud-based environments, and then work on how do we make it a smooth transition from what you're building and staging to what you're actually pushing out to production.
That's awesome. Tell me more about the excitement that you're hearing from your customers, early customers who are trying the product out, right?
So we have an open source product right now, and that's been out for a couple of years now, and it's interesting because there's just a huge variety of use cases, including some that I did not expect.
There you go. Yep.
There's people who are using it to like essentially replace Dropbox, but for their code. They want to like, they want to keep their laptops in sync, and so they're synchronizing code that way. I kind of, my original vision actually wasn't even container based. I was just using it for SSH development for like websites and stuff.
Right.
But then there was a lot of demand for support for Docker, and now there's a lot of demand for support for Kubernetes, and that's something that's coming very soon.
Oh, that's awesome. That's exciting.
But it's interesting because people are using it for different things. There's individuals who are using it. They might have some complicated setup where they're having to SSH through some Bastion server to get to some internal server, and they're able to do that easily, and it just looks native. They don't have to use some ultra high latency Vim session. And I think that's important as well, right? It's not just about GUI editors. It's also it's about having low latency and having your local configuration available. So it's been helpful to those people who don't want to have to work in some ultra restricted system. They can work on their laptop and then just have Mutagen push that behind the scenes.
That's awesome.
And they really like that. And then we've also had some teams who are able to just do exactly this model where they're unifying. They've defined some Docker environment that's their development environment. Especially some of them are doing like work for third parties, so they have the third party code comes in and they are able to orchestrate that in a way that they can spin it up locally and you have the developers move in and out of the team that's working on that, and it's just a lot easier for them.
Yes.
So that's been interesting, but we're gonna launch a new product soon that will vastly expand what Mutagen can do and the platforms it can access. So quite excited about that.
That's awesome. Is that something you can share with the team? Or?
I can give a basic summary right now. So the idea is essentially, right now Mutagen support is based on when it connects to a remote system, it injects a binary into the system and then communicates with that and does synchronization that way. And if we built support for SSH, we built support for Docker, but there's many other orchestration platforms out there that people have, not just Kubernetes, but you've got like Vagrant, for example, and other virtual machine-based setups. So essentially, we're building a tool that allows you to create tunnels that will operate in any remote infrastructure without having to relay through the cloud or anything. They just directly from your laptop to that remote infrastructure. But it's completely platform agnostic,
awesome.
You can just set it up anywhere. And so we're sort of at the beta testing stage for that, and hoping to ship that out to the general public.
That is really exciting, right? That is really exciting. How big is your team?
It's just me, actually.
Just you? That's awesome, right? So and you're getting a lot of contribution back from open source community as well, I guess?
Yeah, the biggest contribution actually is, so we get a lot of pull requests, but also just like feedback. That's the main thing. It's really understanding people's development stories and how they work and the tools that they work with, because it's just like all across the spectrum.
Exactly.
Right? It's not just Node.js developers or Go developers. It's, everyone has this problem at one point. And I think it's interesting as well, because I think everyone has this problem like early on in their development career. They're like, how do I write code here and move it there? And they kind of give up because they research, okay, I can do SSHFS, but it's not really working that well from Windows, or there's some caveats or something. And they kind of just give up on the idea and they're like, I'll just use Vim over SSH. And so I think people are kind of coming back to this idea like, maybe this is actually feasible now. Maybe we can actually edit code here using our editor and make that look, or make that synchronize in real time to a remote system. So that's been interesting, and as people come back to this idea and they say, okay, maybe we can actually do that now. They're taking their stack and they're moving that, and so that feedback is really valuable, like how they're using this, what the tools they're using are, and how it changes their workflow as well. Because I think there are many things that I haven't thought of yet in terms of way people would, instead of running Mutagen from their laptop, they'll start up Mutagen in a container and then have that container running in the cloud, syncing code from their laptop to other containers. I think that's going to be really exciting. I think this new product will be really interesting for that as well, because I think it will add even more interesting topologies that people can set up and play with. So
that's awesome.
It's exciting.
Right? Yeah. So if you were to define what would a success look like for you, right? 6 months or a year or two from now.
So I want to have obviously you want to have a successful company, but really what I want is to have an impact on the way that developers work. Because I've worked as a developer, I worked as both as part of a company, as a contractor, where I'm remote from the company, and I would like to see the way that we work change. We have this amazing cloud infrastructure that these providers have built out, and it's great. It's completely changed the way the applications are architected, the way that they're deployed, the way that how fast you can deploy your applications. It's all automated now in some cases. I think we can see that same radical shift for development, and I want Mutagen to be a part of that.
That's awesome.
I want to just fundamentally change the way that developers approach, setting up their development environment, and just remove these pain points. Like, it shouldn't take you 2 weeks to get onboarded with a code base.
Exactly.
Maybe you need to read through the code base, but the thing is, if you architect your application in a way where you have really modular services, right, then you know all the entry points to your application. It even makes it easier to read through the code, right? And then the only barrier there is actually getting the infrastructure to run these applications.
That's really awesome. It's a very powerful vision and a problem worth solving, right? I mean, every dev can relate to this. So congratulations on taking this journey, right? That's super awesome, right? Let's switch a gear a little bit, right? The name of the company that you chose is super interesting to me, right? Tell me more about it. How do you get to this name? What does it mean? What's behind it?
Yeah, so the name was actually kind of chosen to reflect the architecture of the tool. So as I said, Mutagen, as it works right now, works by connecting to a remote system, probing its OS, its architecture, finding an appropriate agent binary, and then copying that over and communicating with it. And so this kind of reminded me of like a virus in a sense. And so I was looking for sort of a biological name to sort of reflect the way that it operated. And I came across the name Mutagen, and I liked it because it's something that it's kind of an interesting word, first of all, but then it also reflects being able to raise the rate at which mutations are happening in a system.
Nice.
And I kind of think that has a I think it's analogous to what you're doing with coding, right? And if you can reduce the barrier to setting up your development environment, then you can increase the rate at which you can develop your application.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought of it as analogous along those lines.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's definitely a very catchy name, right? That registers, right? Once you hear it, you will not forget. So.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's like a biotech company. Mutagen. Okay, what sector of biotech are you working on?
Yeah. It's mutagen.io, right?
.io, yeah.
And that's super awesome. So tell me a little bit about your background, right? I see that you briefly talked about degree in physics, right? You were at Oxford.
Yes, I studied at Oxford. I studied particle physics. I worked on Higgs boson searches. I kind of came in I came in 2010, which is 2 years before the official discovery publication. So I was really fortunate to be involved with that, at least in some small part, in the Higgs search. And so I spent a year at Oxford, then 2 years at the LHC in Geneva. I was working on the ATLAS experiment, and then a year back in Oxford to write on my thesis. And that's interesting. And CERN kind of has a lot of these same problems, right? They have these massive data sets. I mean, the data sets that you work on for physics data, when they collect them off the detector, I mean, it's exabytes of data,
right? And
then you filter that down, and by the time you process and filter and reconstruct that data, and it's a data set you can work with, you're still talking several terabytes of data, right? It's a little too much to pull down to your laptop, certainly too much to run an analysis on your laptop. And so CERN has built a lot of really complex infrastructure to handle these analysis, both interactive infrastructure and batch infrastructure. But I think there's a lot of potential as well for physics, to be able to interact in real time with these massive data sets. You have to have, that's not hardware you can carry around with you.
Right.
And especially, if you do really complex reconstruction that might involve, specialized hardware like GPUs or FPGAs or something like that, that's always going to be infrastructure that is centralized, right? And maybe shared by several people.
Right.
So I think that kind of, for me, is a segment I would like to be able to make some contribution to as well in terms of the way that work is done there. Because I think a lot of physicists are maybe frustrated, or at least grad students. I don't know, maybe postdocs are more calm, but I know a lot of grad students, you want to run some analysis, but you submit the jobs to the batch queue, and it takes hours and hours to get your results back. And so if you had a more interactive workflow, and I think this is another place where web-based IDEs are really cool, because I think you can do really cool interactive analyses in like a Jupyter notebook, for example. But the thing is, when you do that, you always have like a huge amount of underlying analysis code, right? You might have this great demo in a Jupyter notebook where it's like, oh, there's 3 lines, you get this amazing plot. Yeah, but there's like 50,000 lines of underlying analysis code that goes into making that plot. And so I think Mutagen can maybe complement systems like that, where you might have a big analysis code base, and you maybe need to tweak that or adjust some parameters, but then you wanted to have the nice visualization. So I think those web-based IDs are really cool for that.
No doubt about it, right? I have a 12 years boy, right, and he learns how to code in school, right? So I'm convinced that at some point the next generation is going to use the coding to supplement their core job, right? It does not have to be, not everybody's going to be a dev, right? They're probably doing physics, learning chemistry, right? They're probably playing soccer or whatnot. But having these technologies on their hand that provides the layer of abstraction and making life easy, will essentially that next step into things that you said, taking out those frustration that are secondary to your core job, right? And allowing these sort of innovations is going to be the key. So I'm super excited about the journey that you are on and the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So that's really great. Tell me more about the aha moment, right? What was that moment when you decided this is it? I need to go in full time. I'm gonna stop doing what I'm doing, and this is it.
I think so. I think the motivation for doing it was something that was built up over several years. But I think the moment for me was when I realized that users were using this thing in a way that I had not originally anticipated. They wanted to work in containers, for example. Which was something that I hadn't originally built support for. Fortunately, it was easy to integrate because of the way it was architected. But I realized that there was a whole massive world of untapped ideas and potential there that I needed to be explored. And so I decided that okay, I'm gonna finish up my contracting work, and then I'm gonna kind of go full time on this and work on this and really make this experience. For developers, something that is just completely seamless. The open source tool at the time was good, but it wasn't as seamless as I wanted it to be. And it didn't have network forwarding, for example, at the time. And there's still a lot of things I want to build into this, and to really make it look like your laptop is having the power of all the cloud infrastructure that's backing it. But yeah, I think it was when I realized that people were abusing it in a way that was exciting, and I think that was the moment where I decided, okay, I need to really explore this and see what the potential applications could be.
Fantastic.
And I think I still haven't even come close to scratching the surface of what those applications could be.
I'm with you on that. This is a great example of the passion meeting a real purpose in a way. You were passionate about solving that problem, right? And the purpose was so rightful. So I think you're onto something super exciting.
Yeah, it's an interesting technical problem as well.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of mundane, but it's actually, you get to touch essentially all of the stack, from low-level system calls to building the web application, and I think it's a really complex technology. There was a quote from Rob Pike, who was one of the Go inventors, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, to make something really simple is extremely complex. And there's a huge amount of complexity that goes into building something that looks simple. And Mutagen is still evolving, and I wanted to make it even simpler and more accessible and automatic for people. But there's just a huge amount of interesting complexity that goes on behind the scenes to enable that. And so that's been kind of fun as well to work on.
Yeah, talking about complexity, to me, let's talk about some of the moments where you had some really hard challenges to be solved, right, in this journey, where you probably had a moment, is this really I want to solve, right? Is this what I want to go after? What was that moment where you had a really hard problem to be solved?
That's tricky. Not that there aren't any, but there's so many that it's difficult to kind of pick one out. I think the product I'm working on now, this sort of transport and platform agnostic extension to Mutagen, there's been a lot of technological research that went into that, and I wasn't really sure that it was going to be possible or feasible. And now that I am, I'm a little bit more relieved. But I was, part of me wondered, should I just build in, sort of bespoke support for all these different platforms and all these different protocols, or should I really try and push the envelope and make this work in a way that's completely protocol agnostic? And fortunately, I had some luck in terms of finding the right solution to that, but there was a point where there was a lot of prototypes that didn't quite work the way that I wanted, and I was kind of not sure if that was actually going to be something that was possible or viable. And to be honest, it's not something I figured out completely by myself, right? There's
Of course.
a lot of, especially open source technologies
Yes.
and standards that make it feasible.
Yeah.
But finding the exact right combination in which to combine those things was quite difficult.
It's always the hardest thing in a way, right? And as a founder, one of the biggest challenges is to figure out like where can I cut the corners, right? Is it right time to pile onto the tech debt, right? What is the fastest way to get the product out of the market, right? Whatnot. So yeah, do you have any advice that you can share with the other founders around what approaches you should be taking when you hit the bump?
For me, it's really, because I'm a solo founder as well, so I don't have anyone to bounce. I mean, I have people to bounce ideas off of, but they're not sitting in the office next to me. So when I want to ask someone advice, it has to be a very pointed question. It's not just sort of open brainstorming. So for me, the difficult thing is, especially if you're building a lot of prototypes and you have a lot of different design paths that you've gone down. It's difficult to partition those like failed ideas off, but also still extract the useful tidbits of knowledge and information you've got out of there, right?
Right.
Like I don't remember there was a TV show or something with like some time travelers, and every time like they would change the timeline, they would have to remember all of the previous timelines that they had experienced, and it would like start to make them go slightly crazy. And I think as a solo founder, it's kind of similar. Right? You have all these ideas and these paths that you're going down, and they don't work out, but you're still carrying that baggage of all the development and the thought and the design that went into that, and you need to figure out a way to like partition that off and still extract the useful intelligence that you've gained, but otherwise let it not drag you down, because it's really easy to just go down a path and get lost, and then you realize like, nobody needs this feature, and why am I still trying to figure that out? There's a very simple way to do that. And yeah, so that's for me the difficult thing, especially as a solo founder, is just being able to partition off those. Right.
And filtering out the noise and keeping what's important along with you in a way, right? So
yeah.
So talking about a solo founder, right? Has there been a time where you felt, boy, it would have been great to have somebody?
I still feel that actually regularly. I still feel that a lot. I've done startups before, and I've in it with a founder, and there are a lot of like extreme pros to that, and there's also cons to that. So I've had that experience before. I think as a solo founder, there's the same pros and cons kind of in the opposite direction. But it's okay. It's I still would love to have somebody to bounce ideas off of regularly. I think the difficult thing with being a solo founder is that like every failure is completely your fault. Not that you want to be the kind of person, not that you want to be the kind of person who blames other people for your failings or any failings, especially not in a startup team. That's not a healthy MO.
Yeah.
But as a founder, you do necessarily internalize that, and I think that's true of like even if you have a company with employees, right? You're still going to internalize the failures of the company as your own.
Yes, 100%.
And truthfully, they are. But yeah, if you don't have that, you don't have someone else to like kind of balance out your emotional state when you're at the low levels, that can be difficult. And I think that's something that in Silicon Valley people start talking about now is the emotional state of founders. It's really important to the health of the company. I think with a solo founder, it's maybe even more precarious.
Yeah. So tell me more. How does it feed into your motivation when you go through those states? And I'm pretty sure being a solo founder and solving such a technically complex problem, right? There are ups and downs, right? How does it feed into your motivation? How does it keep you going every single day?
I think honestly, it's the fact that I get feedback from people online. You get GitHub issues, right? Even if they're a complaint, even if they're bugs, it's you know what? That means someone's using the product, and it's exciting, right? So. But mostly as positive feedback, and a lot of the requests that come in are feature requests. Are like, I love this, but I would really love that, and that's motivation for me, especially when I'm kind of stuck on something. But for now, I think people are actually quite excited about the idea, so that keeps me excited. But yeah, like everyone, I kind of hit technical roadblocks or development roadblocks, and there's, especially in running a company, there's other things besides just writing code that kind of trip you up. So that's something to deal with as well.
Exactly. So I bet working with the open sources definitely helped you out dramatically, right? in this journey. And I guess that's one of the reasons and sources for your motivation, feedback, and learning and building the product out, right? So are there any words that you want to share with the community on betting on open source? Because there's two sides of open source in a way, right? People are excited about it, but they're also concerned about using it to an extent where they don't fully understand the aspect of the code and what if things go wrong and whatnot. So what is the advice would you like to give to fellow founders?
I think for me, it's the most important thing is just being very careful about the projects and the libraries and technologies that I select. I try to keep, dependencies to a minimum. Not that I don't want to, not to knock open source code, but I think in any project you want to keep complexity to a minimum, and you have to manage your technical debt. And not fully understanding a third-party project to some extent is technical debt, right? So yeah, I think just being very selective about what you choose and vetting, just pull in dependencies blindly, right? Vet what you're going to pull in. And I think, fortunately, when you have a language like Go, which is what Mutagen is built in, it's so easy to just go look at the source. You can go look at the standard library syscall implementation, and it's totally understandable. So I think that's a real benefit. There obviously, if you're pulling in some 25-year-old C++ library, you may be less fortunate in that regard. But if you're really in need of that, then maybe you have the technical expertise to vet that as well. So I don't know. I think. There's definitely no way Mutagen would exist without the libraries that underlie it. Right. I mean, the code base it's like 50,000 something lines of code now, but the dependencies are millions of lines of code.
Yes.
And I think it's just not possible anymore to write. Not only that, but you wouldn't want to build your entire application stack from scratch, right?
Yeah.
You're not a security expert. You're not. I mean, even if you are a security expert, right? Then it's not something you're not going to re-implement that every time you're doing a project. But not even just that. I mean, any just doing colorized output on the command line. It's like there's just there's no reason to write that yourself. You're going to have to go to the open source community, and there's just so many great projects out there now. And I think especially there's kind of, I don't want to say like a barrier to entry, but like the production value of open source projects, it seems to me, has kind of increased. There's this idea that you kind of need to build a community around every open source project that you do, and not everyone. I mean, if you're doing some utility library, maybe not, but if you're talking about the major dependencies you're going to add, I think it's useful to look at the community around it and see, not only how often is this library updated, but just how helpful is the community and how active is the community. But fortunately, I think there's also a really great shift, especially in Go and Rust and other communities, towards this really open and engaging community where it's everyone's willing to help. In the same way that entrepreneurs want to help other entrepreneurs, I think open source developers want to help other open source developers. They just want to see cool stuff exist, and I think that's really cool. Yeah,
that's really fascinating how communities have changed, our day-to-day lives, and how much dependent we are, and trust that we build across individuals and people to build the great stories like that. That's super fantastic. Tell me more about your work, your life outside the work, right? What do you do when you're not working on Mutagen?
So I have kind of an interesting. So I've just moved back to the U.S. Actually, I was living in Ukraine for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
I met my wife while I was studying, and then she's Ukrainian, so it was just easier to move there. So I've been kind of living in Ukraine and absorbing Ukrainian culture for the last 5 years, which has been interesting and exciting. And now I've just moved back to the U.S. To pursue this startup. But I like to travel. I like, especially in Ukraine. There's just so much great nature there. It's amazing. You go to the Carpathians, and it's just this untouched, beautiful, hiking areas or skiing. Well, the skiing is developing, but it's coming. But I like being outdoors. I as much as I like development and I like coding, I really hate sitting in front of a computer for extended periods of time. But it's that's kind of the nature of the beast. I think it's like watchmaking, right? It's like you really appreciate your craft and you spend 20, 30 years just learning to start it, and but you're still hunched over all day. So being able to get outside is really important. I mean. No,
that's great. That's great. It's all,
I think as a solo founder, it's I don't know if it's expected, but it's kind of just natural that you're working or at least thinking about your startup most of the time, unfortunately. But I think it's getting to a point now where it's a little bit more manageable, right? Obviously, when you start a company, there's a whole lot of logistical stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with the product that you're building.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had some help with that, but yeah, it's still a huge time sink.
Yes.
And you've got people who are emailing you issues, people who are emailing you and just asking you about your general plans, and you kind of got to keep in touch and not let those leads go cold. And so yeah, it's sort of a full-time endeavor for me at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that work-life balance and being away from the computer will improve.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, most definitely, right? As you grow, and those are some of the things that will help you take the next step in the journey that you're on. That's fantastic. Tell me about a few people that you really admire the most. Like, you look for aspiration and, the learnings.
Who I really admire? I like the Stripe founders.
Oh yeah?
They're just like the purest form of entrepreneur. It's kind of amazing. Like they have these ideas and they're just able to actualize them, but they're able to do it in this kind of startup MVP fashion. I mean, now they're like a very large company, but when they built their startup, I mean, I remember back in 2012 when I was working on a different startup, we were looking at Stripe as they were kind of just coming out. And it was crazy because it was such a small company, but they were able to build this incredibly complex platform, and now it's grown into this enormous thing. So if I had even like 1/10 of the success that those two have had, I would be very, very excited.
Oh yeah.
The Stripe founders, I think they're really just, I mean, they're both insanely smart. You just listening to them talk is kind of like, not intoxicating, but you kind of go to a trance just like listening to them talk about like building a business, and it's kind of just amazing like how focused and like there's very minimal waste in the way that they like approach their business and the way that they build their business. So I would say if I could aspire to be, to that level of success, that would be ideal for me.
Yeah, I wish you good luck, and having that support from the community is fantastic. So yeah.
Even if you're complaining about it, it's still like that's super valuable feedback. In fact, I would say it's even more valuable feedback to hear what's not working than what is. So.
All right. Cool. Thank you very much for spending time with us. It's been a pleasure, and good luck.
Thanks very much.